Hi, and welcome for inviting me, or thank you for inviting me. I'm going to tell you a bit about public procurement generally in Hungary and, the problems that we're facing, and then one solution that we try to build to counter corruption, or at least help those who want to do this. K-Monitor does three main things. We do advocacy, research, and IT data things, and partly here in this case, the IT work, red flags, came from the fact that we didn't really succeed with policy changes. We have governments for the last quite couple of years that is very unresponsive regarding our advocacy efforts. The reason is that they're the main source of corruption, which is quite centralized in Hungary, so it's not the case like in a lot of countries that you have corruption, the government is maybe not strong enough to fight it. The government is actually the main driver. And some bit more of the context is that as in lots of cases, I think, when it comes to corruption, it is connected to political finance. So was it in, and so is it in Hungary, and corruption became quite, public procurement became quite soon the main channel to bring money into political finance, public money into political finance. First, it was a more simple way through kickbacks, but then kind of an institutionalized way was a bank of favors. Money was not really transformed, but everybody knew that, okay, you are loyal to this minister, you're loyal to that guy, and we're gonna ask for a favor and you're gonna pay. Let's say your company will provide us billboard advertisements for free or for a very low amount of money at the elections, but in return we're gonna give you a lot of state advertisements in the year that you can put out on your billboards. And this is just a very small illustration of the transparency of party financing, which is similarly opaque to public procurement. What we did here was we sued the government to get data on what candidates spent on the elections. And we had to clean it and work on it a lot. But finally, what we wanted to show with that these are the parties of Hungary, and the green part is from their finances that is transparent, and all the gray is what we have no clue where the money comes from, and actually often not even what they spend it on. And one reason for this is that there was actually in Hungary always an agreement between the two main political forces, independently from who was on power. Money that came from corruption was split up by the government party and the main opposition party in this manner of 70 to 30%. Of course, this is a very rough estimation, but the internal information from those who participated in these schemes said that more or less this is how it worked. And since in 2010 the current government came to power with a supermajority, and I think this is crucial to understand, they saw that they don't have to negotiate and share at all. So they took everything for themselves and also reshaped the way how public funds are distributed in a completely central manner. So I think you cannot get big procurements without having the agreement of someone on a very high level in the government. And also the socialist guys previously in the government, they don't get anything. The only thing that they got, like as a result of the old friendship or collaboration, is that they were not sent to prison, or they were not, the cases were not prosecuted, but with just an election promise to go after corruption in the previous era. Why procurement is also super interesting, because of course it's a lot of EU funds are spent through procurements. So actually it's not only Hungarian government money if we talk about procurements, but it's also huge amount of EU taxpayers' money that go through the Hungarian very corrupt public procurement system. And just one other thing, because this is also relevant, that Hungary has just now got an e-procurement system, but it's actually not really used yet. So the main actors of controlling public procurement in Hungary are actually NGOs and journalists, because the authorities that should do so, be it the Public Procurement Authority or be it the police or prosecutor's office, they so much connected to the government that they don't do anything of that kind. Of course, there are certain cases when they fine, if it is super obvious, but generally there is no real control. I will skip these slides because this is more generally about procurement and also, you know, the corrupt practices what we heard of. And I want to tell you a few stories just to see what happens in practice. This is our Prime Minister, maybe you know him already. The other guy drinking palinka with him is his son-in-law. And one of the major corruption scandals that appeared recently, actually it was uncovered maybe 3-4 years ago, but nothing happened. And then there was an Olaf investigation recently, and then, you know, it came up again. And they, you know, they confirmed actually the fraud scheme that was going on. So and this is very much shown how public procurement is misused in Hungary to establish a new elite or to, you know, rise new oligarchs or new business people who were not really active in business before. So this guy, Mr. Tiborcs, he had a company that started to engage in public lighting, like the street lights, but they didn't have any contracts before and also no references. So in one city of Hungary, in the countryside, where the mayor was a guy who is now the second person in the government after Orban, he announced the public procurement for having a new, very efficient LED lighting system, and these guys won it. But it was then a very open and you know, it seemed to be a very open procedure. They didn't request much of references, of course, you know why, because they don't have that, and they somehow managed to make them win. And afterwards, once they had this reference, they used this. The government gave to cities lots of EU funds to, you know, do new streetlight system to save energy. So of course they did the procurements for that, and for some reason the only company that was always eligible was the company of this guy, because, you know, previously they managed to make him eligible, and then they did. Like a huge amount, in several cities there's a huge amount of these investments. It turned out that they were overpriced, and it also turned out that in lots of cities, actually these are what citizens reported, that it's darker. So even though they did a new technique, maybe it saves some energy, but you don't really see on the street. So it's a complete failure. And now there is some investigation going on, but you can imagine that they will never catch this guy who is the son-in-law of the Prime Minister. So just to have a very practical example. And this is some examples from the past, because corruption existed before the Fidesz government as well, but the scheme was a bit different. This is when they shared, you know, money, and there it was always, and I think it corresponds quite a lot what Matthias showed with, you know, the elections coming and government spending more on procurement. So of course, if you spend more on that, you can also put away more money. So it's to show that something is going on in the country, but also we can channel more into the pocket. So obviously what you see is they built a huge bridge at a place where actually no bridge is needed. So they just could have done the road like this. Huge amount of money spent on this, you know, and then of course it was advertised as a very, very, very modern technology and a very nice construction. And then the Hungarian plains with tunnels. So we also had that, and even some of the tunnels crashed because there was no earth about it or soil about it. So they had to bring their soil to have the tunnels covered. So this is the let's say the the real part before I show you data or tell you about the data. And this is figures from the Corruption Research Center Budapest, who analyzed public procurement data from 2009 until 2011, and in 2010 you see the elections. And what you see is the top 30 companies that won procurements. And you can see how much they won before the elections. The red is the ones close to the socialists, almost gone to zero, and then new companies going up super quickly. And here, another funny thing which shows again how much it is directed by the state, who gets what in terms of money. This is the company which, the figures are for a company called Közgép, which was the main construction company connected to the Fidesz government at the beginning. And the guy who is owning that was the one top oligarch, a very close friend of Orbán, and he was actually building up the whole financial infrastructure behind Fidesz. But then they got into a conflict and a very open fight. So after that, it was in 2014, you can see that from one year to the other, he almost won nothing and then really nothing. And imagine if you have a fair public procurement system, it's impossible that there is such a big change in what are the top companies winning public procurement. And this was a top construction company. And just some very fresh news from Hungary. This is something that we haven't actually published yet. Statistics on the types of procedures. Daniel was telling about, that in Hungary we have lots of tenders where we only have one bidder, and this shows, this is because the table or the sheet on the top shows you procedures in the EU regime. There we have 73% of open procedures, which is not that high in I would say, as it should be, but still 73% is, let's say, a lot. But there you have these tricks with, they tailor it to certain companies, or at the end, or nobody will apply because they already know that who's gonna be the one that they will. So this is the way how they trick here. When you go to the national regime, you will be super surprised. The number for open procedures is less than 3%, less than 3. And when we were asking for that data, and of course, just to be really, fair, if you take the amount of money spent on procurements, then the amount of money spent in procurements in Hungary, 2/3 of it goes through the EU procedure, which is more open, and only 1/3. But if you look at the number of procedures, it's the opposite way, of course. 2/3 of the procedures are in the national regime. So if you look at procurement practice and what Hungarian municipalities, institutions get used to, then they have this miserable system where only 3% of it is really open. And when we asked for this data, we just got it a few days ago. First, it took us like 2 months to get this very simple statistic that you normally have published everywhere. First, we got different data. So we asked for statistics on open procedures, and then the guys told us, here are the data on public procedures. So they considered everything as open, saying public, which is somewhere announced, or at least after on published in the national bulletin. So this is how they want to fake publicity, but in real 3% is the right number. So then, coming to RedFlags, the reason why we decided to do a system to monitor public procurements is that we saw that actually it's really the press and NGOs who look at these documents and write the stories and try to pressurize the government and local governments to do something, or at least feel uncomfortable. And what journalists previously, and we as well, did was we were scrolling through the public procurement database of Hungary on a daily basis, and it was, sometimes 100 documents a day published, and it took a lot of energy. So we said, why not automatize this process in a way that we can clearly identify quite a lot of indicators that show that there is a risk. It doesn't mean that it's a corrupt procurement, but it shows that it is something worth looking at. So what we wanted to have is just this assistance that for a journalist in the morning when they wake up, what better could they do than with the coffee they go through public procurements, and they don't have to go through hundreds but maybe a few, and even see what the problem is. So we did this project in cooperation with TI Hungary and the IT development company. And we identified 60 indicators for corruption. We were able to implement 40 of it, and 30, it's like 41 actually, but 32 are focused on procurement calls, and only 9 on the award notices or the connection between the two, because we really wanted to do it as a risk forecast tool, so not talk about it once the problem is there, or once the corrupt contract is signed, but already when they announce a call which is suspicious, there should be pressure. So that's why we try to focus on it, and some of the indicators are just simply based on the law, so we were just checking whether the procurement documents comply with the law. In other cases, we looked at statistics, and we also worked with a pool of experts working on procurement. Some of them, even from the government, told us what they see as the main problems. So we wanted to transform them into these indicators. And yes, and what you see here is actually this is the part of the site, so there you can select what kind of indicators you're interested in. You can select several or just a few, and really tailor this search on your interest. So if there's a journalist only interested in healthcare, they can only have a look at healthcare procurement. And then you get, here are the results, so it shows you how many flags this procurement got, and immediately after also an explanation what the problem is according to the system, so then they only have to go through the document and check whether it's true or not. And it's also useful in a way that we often get feedback. Sometimes, there's a failure. I mean, we show that something is corrupt or risky, and in fact it is not. But then we can, improve the system with this. Once we also had a workshop where some official people attended, and, they used the system, and they were telling us, well, there is an indicator that always gives a signal in this case, which is actually not a real problem, and they explained us, and we understood it. And then they also said, because we quite known what are the corrupt procurements at our institution, so they always compared when we really find a trouble or when it's a mistake. So they said it would be very useful for them to have this system internalized, so they can pre-check procurements before they are published. They say, no, we won't give that to you, because obviously then you work on it as long as they seem okay. And this is something which we made out of the data, which is quite interesting. Correlations between indicators, because what we did here, we listed the top 10 procuring entities in Hungary, and we looked on their red flags profiles. And you could quite clearly see that in certain branches or for certain companies, they always do the same, or repeat the same scheme again and again, how they trick procurements by tailoring it on one bidder or restricting procedures in some way. So this was quite interesting to see that there is this kind of statistically correlation as well. And well, the tool is used by journalists. However, these are some articles where they refer to it. However, I have to confirm that we have to invest also a lot of work into promoting it to journalists, so we ourselves use it for monitoring, and often, we send something that we found and nobody found it before to journalists that, guys, this is something interesting, would you look at it? And then they often look at it and do something with it. So it's sometimes you have to train them a bit to use it, because just after we published this, people looked at it and sometimes went to the site, but it needed some extra work that it's really used. And currently we have, let's say, around 10 to 20 users of the site a day, which is not a huge number in one way. On the other hand, I think, if you look at a small country as Hungary is, and how many journalists you have who are specialized in public procurement, I think the most important stakeholders use it and know about it. And of course, we have some plans to work on it in the future, because this was the very first attempt for us to do this tool, so it would be really interesting. I didn't tell you that it's actually based on the TED, the European Tenders Daily, so we don't work with the national database, because what we realized is that the data quality is even worse in the national database, but it would be nice to extend it to the smaller scale procurements. And also what we're really interested in, as I told you, that we have only built 40 of the 60 indicators. The reason is that sometimes it's very difficult to find how or to find the corruption or the risk within the text. So what we want to do is do a bit of machine learning and really train the program to find patterns and look at patterns based on text analysis and such things. And of course, it could be integrated with lots of other databases. So here, this is only working with the procurement data itself. And there is one other, we have at K-Monitor a huge database of corruption cases. So once a company appeared in a corruption case, it's a pink flag showing that this company might be risky. So it's not saying that the procurement itself is problematic, but it is risky. So, and this is some things that we have at K-Monitor where it could be also integrated. Let's say we have a mobile app showing corruption cases in Hungary. And of course, you could also put the procurements on it so people could report when they see something strange. Or we have this program with the network of business people which could be connected to that. Or even sometimes we, this was a funny project when we analyzed like sailing competition participants in Hungary, because this is like an elite sport, and often you're not able to track who are friends among politicians, business people. So we were just taking down data from regattas from certain sailing clubs and then connecting the dots so you could see who is sailing in one boat with another person. And it was quite interesting to see what secretaries of states are sailing together with the heads of certain big construction companies and so on. So this is all information that you could channel into this database, and that would show you even more information. So I think it was a bit longer than it should have been, sorry, but thank you very much for